As we consider the college admission process, there are two main parts that are involved in the review. The first one is the academic, and the second one is the non-academic. In this session, we're going to focus on the academic part. The academic review is comprised of 4 different components. The first one is the GPA, the second one is testing, the third one is course selection or the rigor of your courses, and the fourth one is your class rank. Now, I'm going to talk about each one of those components more in detail, but before I do that, I'd like to talk about the purpose of the academic review in college admission. So as we consider those two parts, the academic and the non-academic, and we need to understand the relationship between those two parts in order to prepare well for the college admission process. So when colleges receive a student's application, the first thing they need to do is they need to figure out whether or not a student is academically qualified for their school. Colleges are not necessarily looking for students with the highest GPA and the highest test scores, but what they're really looking for in the academic review is they're trying to determine whether or not a student is capable of handling the rigor of the coursework at that college. So, for instance, if a top 10 or very selective college is looking at a student's application, they need to understand, has the student proven that they have the ability to do the coursework at my school if we were to admit him? And this is important because no matter how good a student's activities are, no matter how talented that student is in different areas, if that student comes to a college and he's not able to handle the academics, then the college has to put that student on academic probation and maybe even expel the student or kick the student out because they're not able to keep up with the coursework. And that's going to be the worst situation for a college and for a student. And so we have to understand that the main point of the academic review is to determine whether or not that student can be successful academically at that college. Now, obviously, the level of success or the level of achievement to prove whether or not you're capable is different based upon the college that you're applying for. So as we talk about the Ivies, or we talk about Stanford, or when we talk about that group of top 20 schools, generally speaking, you must do more to prove that you're capable of handling the work at those schools. When you talk about the next levels of schools, when you talk about a USC or an NYU or a Boston University, the things that you must do to prove that you can handle the academics at those schools is different. And so what you need to do to prove whether or not you're academically qualified really varies on a college-by-college basis. But regardless of the school, when we talk about the academic review, the first thing and the primary thing that students are trying to do is they're trying to show that you're academically qualified for the schools that you're applying for. Now, as we get into the various components of the academic review, there are 4 main parts, as I mentioned before: the GPA, the testing, the course selection or the rigor of courses, and the class rank. I'll start by talking first about the GPA. Different colleges calculate the GPA in different ways. And so it's not always good to talk about a GPA as a numeric value, a 4.0 or a 3.8 or a 4.1. Rather, we need to understand GPA based upon the schools that we're applying for. So for instance, in California, most California students will apply for the University of California or the UCs, UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Irvine, etc. At the UCs, the UC GPA is 10th and 11th grade GPA only. And therefore, if I say my GPA is 3.8, can I get into UCLA? It's very difficult to assess that because I don't know if the 3.8 means 10th and 11th grade GPA or 9th through 11th grade GPA, etc. USC, on the other hand, looks at 9th through 11th grade for the GPA. Most private colleges and Ivy level schools focused on 10th grade through first semester of 12th grade GPA. And therefore, when we talk about GPA, rather than talking about the numeric value, we generally recommend that students focus on making A's. No matter what school you're applying for, if you're making A's, that's the best possible grade that you can earn. And therefore, when we focus on making A's, we also want to differentiate between an A and an A minus. Or we want to differentiate between a B plus and a B minus. Because when colleges are reviewing a student's high school record or their transcript, they're looking at the story of the grades rather than just the grades themselves. As a science major, if I'm making B's in my science classes and A's in my humanities, history and English classes, that looks kind of weird. And so, but if you calculate the GPA as a number, it doesn't really take into account the story behind the grades. And so generally speaking, when we talk about GPA or grades, we really want to focus on the letter grades that students earn. A's, A minuses, B pluses, B's, B minuses, etc. And so that's the best way for students to be able to prepare. As we consider the testing component of the academic review, there are a number of different standardized tests that students must take. First of all, there's the SAT, and then there's the ACT. Now, most colleges will accept either the SAT or the ACT. So if you get a good score on the SAT, you don't need to take the ACT. At the same time, if you get a good score on the ACT, you don't need to take the SAT. As colleges look at those two different tests, they're just two different options that colleges are giving to students to choose between because they are different in style and different in format. In a future episode, I will talk about the differences between the SAT and the ACT. But for college academic review, for the standardized testing component, the SAT or the ACT, that is the most important, and that's the primary test that colleges are going to review. In addition to the SAT and ACT, students also are asked to take something called the SAT subject tests, which were previously called the SAT-2. The SAT subject test is generally testing a student's knowledge or what they've learned in a specific subject in school. That's why it's called a subject test. Now, the subject tests only test knowledge up to the high school level. Therefore, there's no AP material that's involved. Generally speaking, we recommend that students take 3 subject tests in order to cover the requirements for most colleges in America. The UC, generally speaking, does not require any subject tests, but they strongly recommend them. Some colleges require 2 subject tests. Others will strongly recommend 3. And so, in order for students to keep all their college options open, we'll generally recommend that students take 3 subject tests. And that will generally cover all the schools they'll apply for. Now, students also need to be aware that some colleges have very specific subject test requirements. For example, some engineering colleges will require math plus physics or chemistry. And so it's important for students to go to the website of the colleges that they're applying for and see what the subject test requirements are. Because if students don't prepare those things in advance, they can be stuck in a situation where they need to take tests well after they've completed those subjects in school, and that can be a very difficult challenge for most students. So we've talked about the SAT or ACT, we've talked about the SAT subject tests or the SAT-2s, and the next main category of testing that students must complete is the AP testing. AP stands for Advanced Placement, and therefore, as a high school student, if you're advanced, you're basically taking college-level courses. And so AP tests are college-level courses. Now, as we talk about these AP classes and AP tests, families will always ask questions like this. Is it better to take an AP class and get a B, or is it better to take a regular class and get an A? Well, the easy answer is take an AP class and get an A. Okay, and so obviously that's the best of both worlds. But now as we talk about this question and how students must go through this decision-making process, we have to be very well balanced because we should take some AP classes because again, remember we're trying to show colleges that we're capable of doing college level work. And the best way to show that we're capable of doing college level work is by taking college level classes. And again, those are the AP classes. But there are so many different subjects that we can take AP classes in. And again, the question of how many we take always comes up. We'll address some of those questions and some of those points in the next segment when we talk about course selection and the rigor of courses. But as we talk about AP classes, students should generally be prepared to focus their efforts in AP courses and AP testing in the areas that they plan to major in. So if you're going to be a math or a science or an engineering major, plan to do some AP classes and AP testing in the maths and sciences. On the flip side, if you're going to be a humanities major, then plan to do some AP courses and AP testing in the humanities subjects, because that's kind of just a basic expectation that all colleges have. The next component of the academic review is the class selection or the rigor of your courses. How many APs and how many honors are you taking? Now, the number of APs and honors classes that a student takes really depends on the level of college that they're targeting. So you'll hear a lot of different information out there where people are saying, take as many APs and take as many honors as possible. But students and families really need to weigh that and kind of balance that statement with how many APs and honors can a student handle and how many APs and honors does their target college require. So for instance, the UCs, the University of California, they actually limit the number of AP classes that they will give students credit for in terms of calculating the GPA. So if you take 6 AP classes during 11th grade, the UCs won't even give you a GPA bump of +1 for each one of those classes. And therefore, it's not worth it for many students who are targeting the UCs to take that many APs. The Ivies, or the top private colleges on the other hand, they want to see you taking as many as possible. And so this idea or this question of how many APs should I take or how many APs and honors should I take, it must really be considered based upon the target colleges or the level of colleges that students are applying for. And so generally speaking, colleges ask high schools to rank or rate the degree of difficulty of curriculum that a student has taken. Is it the most difficult? Or is it very difficult? Or is it difficult, average, or below average? The top colleges, as we talk about the Ivies, as we talk about Stanford, and as we talk about these schools receive so many qualified applicants. And frankly, they have the luxury to choose from the top. Now, that being said, you don't need to take every single AP to be qualified for those schools. But you have to understand, if I go to an Ivy League college as an English major, I will be asked to take college-level math classes with Ivy level students. And therefore, I need to show the Ivies that as an English major, I can handle Ivy level math classes as well. If I'm going to be a physics major at an Ivy, I still need to take history classes and I still need to take foreign language. And so I need to show the IVs that as a physics major, I can handle history classes and I can handle Ivy level foreign language classes with Ivy level foreign language majors. And so when we talk about the most competitive or the most selective colleges, students and families need to understand why they're being asked to take a broad range of courses. But now, on the other hand, if I'm applying for an engineering school, engineering colleges, MIT, Caltech, etc., they don't always require students take the most competitive humanities classes because engineering schools, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Caltech Institute of Technology, these institutes of technology are really focused on finding the most brilliant and most talented math and science students. And so in those cases, even if students aren't as well balanced in their academics, it's generally okay, but you must be outstanding in the side that you're applying for. And so that's just a general comment on how students should consider and evaluate how many APs, how many honors. But do remember, the purpose of the academic review is to prove that you can handle college-level work. And the best way to do that is by taking AP or college-level courses and succeeding in those classes. The last part of the academic review is the class rank. Now, I want to be careful in talking about class rank because when I start talking about class rank, students and families become very competitive. And because of that competition, many high schools have actually eliminated class rank. So then, how do colleges know where you rank? There are a couple of different ways. So, some colleges have historical data on students from each high school. And when they look at the past data or the historical data, they know, okay, if a student has taken this many AP classes and they've earned this many A's and B's, each college will calculate GPA a little bit differently. And then they know, based upon historical data, if you're at a certain level, then you're probably top 10%. Or if you're at the next level, you're probably around top 20%. So most colleges are not looking at whether you're number 1, you're number 2, you're number 3. Because again, many high schools don't even rank in that way. But most colleges are looking at and evaluating students' rank based upon decile, 10% brackets. So are you the first 10%, or are you the second 10%, or are you the third 10%? And so it's a very loose way of calculating and estimating rank. Now, the reason why colleges do that is this. If you're applying for a very selective college and you are top 30% of your high school, here's what the college wants to know. If you can't even be in the top 10 or 20% of your high school, how can you come to this most selective college and be successful here? Because when we talk about the most competitive or most selective colleges, generally speaking, all of the students are in the top 10% of their graduating high school. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions to that. But when we talk about the most selective colleges, students want to try to be within the top 10% of their graduating class. And each different level of college will want students at different levels. And when you look at a college's marketing materials or when you look at their student data, you'll see things like 90% of our students are within the top 25% of their graduating class. 75% of those students are within the top 10%. And so if you look at your target college and you look at the student or academic data for that school, you'll get a general sense for where they expect you to be. And so, but as I talk about class rank, I don't want students and families to start worrying and jockeying for position. How can I become number one? Because that's not the purpose of how colleges are evaluating class rank. Rather, they want to know from the environment that you're coming from, how successful have you been? Because ultimately, they want to make sure if you come to their school that you can be successful there as well. And so as I talk about this whole academic component, we've talked about GPA, we've talked about standardized testing, we've talked about your course selection or the rigor of your courses, and we've talked about your class rank. To summarize and just bring all these things together, I just want to remind students and families the main goal or the main purpose of reviewing all of these things is to figure out if this student comes to our school, will he or will he not be academically successful? Because they don't want to bring students who will fail academically in schools. And so hopefully this provides you the information and kind of the foundation to begin your academic preparation for your college admission.